Hello and welcome back to Restore. Today we're looking at Ecclesiastes chapters 9 and 10. Ecclesiastes is the only biblical example of what is known as pessimism literature, which is otherwise fairly common in the wisdom literature of the ancient Near East. It's much less unrelentingly bleak than other examples we have, in that it doesn't deny the harsh realities of life, but does hold on to the possibility of joy, faith, and God's goodness despite them. It can be a very difficult book to understand, but there are a couple of things we can bear in mind to make it easier. The first is that it divides reality into two realms, the heavenly and the earthly. And we know the writer is talking about the heavenly realm when they say under heaven, and we know they are referring to the earthly realm when they say under the sun. The former gives us God's viewpoint, the latter the viewpoint of human experience. And as we might expect, these don't always match up. So when the writer says that everything is meaningless under the sun, he's not denying God's creative purpose or goodness, but saying that from where we humans are standing, these things can sometimes be difficult to see or understand. Events can seem meaningless because we don't have the full picture. The second thing to bear in mind about Ecclesiastes is that it distinguishes between observation and faith. The things we see as we go through life, and the things we believe about God despite what we see. And again, these won't always match up or make sense to us because of our limited perspective. This approach allows us to face the grim realities of life without being overwhelmed by them, and to hope for something better by trusting in a good God. Taken as a whole, Ecclesiastes reminds us that the only logical outcome of a secular worldview is despair, because all you have is the apparent meaninglessness and struggle of human experience. But the book equally chides unrestrained, baseless optimism that ignores the realities of life as we know it. Now on to our passage for today, chapters 9 and 10. The start of chapter 9 sounds very much like what we would expect from pessimism literature. Both the righteous and the unrighteous share a common destiny, death. And it's not clear, at least from our human, earthly perspective, that God differentiates between them at all. But verse 4 is somewhat surprising. Anyone who is among the living has hope. And that's surprising because Ecclesiastes has told us several times, in chapter 4 for example, that the dead are better off than the living, and that those who've never been born are even better off. But in verses 7 to 10, the writer recommends living the life we have been given to its full, and enjoying it while we can, making the most of every opportunity, and this in spite of the fact that it seems meaningless, that it ends in death, and that what comes after is mysterious. This is so different from other pessimistic texts, some of which argue that suicide is the only sane response to the world we experience. Yet, for the writer of Ecclesiastes and for the Christian believer, the goodness of God means that we trust that our lives are not in fact meaningless, that there is more to this existence than we can currently see. We trust that in doing the things God designed us for, enjoying creation, loving others, and working, we are in some way fulfilling our purpose. And we trust that no matter what happens in life or when our lives end, God's goodness to us will continue. But we need that heavenly perspective to see things in this way. Otherwise, all these verses call us to is an empty, hollow existence. In chapter 10, verses 16 to 19, we see the disastrous results of focusing on the pleasures of life at the expense of its responsibilities. We are called to enjoy life, but selfish or lazy self-indulgence is not what is meant here. In verses 13 to 18 of chapter 9, we have an intriguing story about a poor man who saved a city with his wisdom, but went unrewarded afterwards. This is another good example of what we've been saying about the difference between observation and faith. On the face of it, this story seems to give the message that wisdom is overrated, because it may go unrewarded. If you happen to be from a humble station in life, people might not even listen to your wisdom. The human, earthly perspective would therefore question the value of having wisdom at all. But the writer of Ecclesiastes, and those with faith, know that wisdom is better than strength, more powerful than weapons of war. It may not always yield its just reward in this life, but the heavenly perspective says that it is still worth seeking and practicing wisdom, because we can leave the outcome to a good God. And in chapter 10, we see some of the outworkings of both wisdom and folly on a personal and national level. Both are seen to have real, tangible consequences, both for the person themselves, but also, in the case of rulers and leaders, for those they lead. Far from painting a picture of a meaningless existence, these chapters encourage us to take life and our responsibilities seriously, because what we do in the here and now really does matter.